Well, senior leadership of Hamas and of Hezbollah have been killed. Ismail Haniyeh, Hassan Nasrallah, now Yahya Sinwar, allegedly Mohammed Daif, but this is unconfirmed and disputed until now. There was the pager attack, the terrorist pager attack by Israel targeting Hezbollah members. Now, if you're waging a war against a militia or against a militia group, then this is the kind of strategy that you would have employed all along, not carpet bombing. The fact that this strategy only seems to have been initiated by Israel recently, after a year of wanton destruction, that indicates that the strategy of wanton destruction had its own objective. And the current sort of decapitation strategy has a separate objective. Now, the declared objective of the carpet bombing was the elimination of Hamas. But if you have the capacity to assassinate leadership of Hamas, or of Hezbollah for that matter, then no, obviously the indiscriminate bombing was clearly not intended to eliminate Hamas, since you could have just been picking off, senior figures of that group one by one until that organization falls into disarray and demoralization or what have you. But now we also have to consider that there are different players in this conflict, and they have their own strategies, they have their own priorities. It's not just Israel, it's not just Hamas, it's not just Hezbollah. The Gulf states have a strategy, Iran has a strategy, the US has a strategy, the OCGFC, the neocons, BRICS, and so on. They all have their own priorities, they all have their own strategies, their own objectives. And every one of those has to understand everyone else in order to factor in each other's strategies and each other's objectives in terms of how and when they pursue their own. Now, talking about Israel, I personally believe that Netanyahu and his cabinet are incompetent. I believe that they are psychopathic, self-deluded, cynical, opportunistic, and uncreative. I think that they have not had a plan from October 7th onward. I think that they've just been improvising, and they've relied on unconditional American support and the assumption of unconditional American support, believing that if they do what they've always done, which is to kill, destroy, and destabilize, then they will continue to be protected and they will continue to be rewarded, because that has been the system that they have survived along for 50 years, for more than 50 years. I think it's been fairly clear from Netanyahu's various speeches and his various statements, like at the UN and at the US Congress and so forth, that he believes that Israel's traditional function for the military-industrial complex and for the neo-colonial world order, he thinks it's still relevant. I think he's cognizant on some level that that relevance is in dispute, but he thinks that he can prove his case by doing what he's doing, that it's still relevant, I mean. Now, of course, he does have his own fanatical expansionist fantasies, and his fanatical cabinet and his political base have the same fantasies, like annexation of Gaza, occupation of land in Lebanon and Syria, and so forth. All of these sort of Zionist fever dreams. And these do factor into his thinking, if only for, or primarily for, solidifying his domestic support and the support of crazed Christian Zionists in the US. So committing genocide in Gaza and expanding the conflict into Lebanon and into Syria, I think, are all reflexive behaviors learned through decades of being rewarded for psychotic, destabilizing aggression. So these are the reasons, in my opinion, for why Netanyahu has been indiscriminately bombing Gaza. In short, because he thinks that his political career depends on it. Because that's what Zionist fanatics, both in Israel and in the US, want him to do. Now, it has never been actually in Israel's or in America's interest to eliminate Hamas or to eliminate Hezbollah. Nor has it really been in their interest to impose regime change in Iran through war or through subversion or what have you. American policy in the region has been based on conflict perpetuation. The existence of armed resistance groups against Israel has been necessary to justify indiscriminate violence and destruction on the pretext of seeking to eliminate armed resistance groups. Thus, it has been understood that these groups must never actually be eliminated. I mean, consider the fact that the main funder for Hamas for the past 15 years, or 16 years, has been Qatar, which is a U.S. ally. It's the main base for the American military in the Gulf. They've never been penalized for that by the United States. They've never really even been criticized or pressured over that. Instead, the American narrative has always been that Iran is the main backer of Hamas, which is patently untrue, or has been untrue for many years. So to actually be going after the leadership of Hamas and of Hezbollah has until now been mostly off the table. The Israelis either did not have the means or did not have the permission to do it, nor the incentive. The fact that they're now actively targeting Hamas and Hezbollah leadership represents a significant change, in my opinion. Now, as I've said many times, I believe that the Gulf, the GCC, and BRICS, and the BRICS aligned faction of the OCGFC have a vision for the Middle East. This vision has been articulated by Mohammed bin Salman, and it basically means development across the region. It means making the main hub of the global economy Bilad al-Sham. This vision requires peace and stability, and to a certain extent, from the vantage point of the GCC and of the OCGFC, it also requires for governments in the region, economies in the region, to be vulnerable, to be weakened, and to be desperate for investment. That includes Israel. That includes Lebanon, Syria, and to some extent Iran. So with this in mind, controlled destruction across the region without any real danger of unmanageable escalation has been advantageous to this GCC OCGFC objective. I mean, Israel's economy is in tatters. They're defaulting on payments, on debts. Their agriculture sector is mortally wounded. People are fleeing in their hundreds of thousands, if not millions. The central bank is in a panic mode. Investment, foreign investment, is evaporating. Infrastructure is damaged, on and on. Companies are leaving. They're becoming increasingly isolated economically. All of this is extremely good for the regional vision. Furthermore, Israel's actions are making them hated globally, and even in the West, especially in Europe. They're even alienating arms manufacturers in Europe who don't want to find themselves implicated for war crimes. So from the point of view of a predatory venture capitalist, Israel is doing nothing but create game-changing opportunities for gaining economic subjugation over Israel. The complete devastation of Gaza, again from the vantage point of predatory investing, has also created massive opportunities for rebuilding and for development. I mean, literally the entire Gaza Strip will need to be rebuilt. And when you're talking about it being rebuilt by foreign funds, then that amounts to the purchase of the entirety of Gaza, including beachfront property, real estate, and so on. Now, that doesn't mean that the GCC or that the OCGFC or BRICS have been in favor of the destruction. It's simply a fact that's been created by Israel's policy, which Israel has pursued for the reasons that I mentioned. I think that the GCC and BRICS have opposed this as much as they can, but I think that they're more concerned about making sure that it doesn't spread in such a way as to directly impact their interests. And I think that they're more concerned with the long-term weakening of Israel and the ostracization of America in the Middle East. Now, the other element, as I've mentioned numerous times, that needs to be dealt with in order for this regional vision to come to fruition is the elimination of militant groups. That means Hamas, and that means Hezbollah. And I think that this is why we're now seeing the leadership of these groups being targeted. Personally, I think that Haniya and Nasrallah were both sacrificed, and possibly Sinwar, though the circumstances of his killing are still a bit unclear. I mean, Israel is saying that they didn't know it was him, but somehow they were able to confirm his identity, supposedly through DNA or dental analysis, very quickly. I think more quickly than it can actually be done. So I'm not personally certain that his killing was not a planned assassination. In my opinion, the leadership of these groups is being targeted for elimination by consensus, a consensus that includes Iran, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, and the US. And the reason is to facilitate the transition from conflict to stability. Now, that's not Israel's intention, but I think that's what's going on. The GCC, it's no secret, would like the Palestinian Authority to represent the Palestinians, not Hamas, in a final settlement for the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now, they want this because they can control the Palestinian Authority more reliably than they could control Hamas. They want Hezbollah to be gone to clear the way for Gulf influence to replace Iran in Lebanon. And that's the same reason why they're mending relations with Bashar al-Assad. I think that Iran is going along with this because they recognize that they have to be team players now within BRICS, and that this is the only way that they can potentially avoid forced regime change. So the leadership of Hamas, I think, is being hollowed out after having accepted the proposal for a coalition government with Fatah to rule over Gaza once the war is over. This will give the PA, the Palestinian Authority, the upper hand in any future administration, which gives the Gulf the upper hand, which will mean that the GCC can basically capture any and all contracts for rebuilding and dictate the terms for those contracts. This will also likely mean beneficial terms for the OCGFC, investors who are aligned with the Gulf, like BlackRock. So yes, I believe that we're in a period of dramatic transition, and it's cold, and it's calculated, and it's ruthless. But of all the countries in the region that have something to lose, Israel is the one who's losing. Look, the GCC has been trying to conquer Bilad Hashem for a long time. This is connected with their rivalry with Iran. They wanted to overthrow Assad for two main reasons: to take Syria back from Iran and to weaken Turkey, because these are the two Muslim powers that they have seen historically to be their competitors for influence in the region. So back in the mid-2010s, they tried violent coercion, and that failed. Or anyway, it wasn't successful in the way that they intended. It was successful in terms of weakening Syria and tenderizing the economy in advance of foreign investment. Somewhere between then and now, they came to a new realization, in my opinion. I think as a result of the development of BRICS, they realized that investment works better than violence, and that you can actually secure your influence better through cooperation than through competition. So we've seen the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, between the GCC, Egypt, and Turkey, between the Arab League and Bashar al-Assad, even peace talks and coordination between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis. The rift between Qatar and its neighbors has more or less been mended. UAE, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Iran all joined BRICS together, and they've all deepened their relationships with China and Russia. All of this greatly diminishes America's influence in the region, to the point that you have Raytheon needing to bribe officials in Qatar just to get contracts. Now, all of this has enabled all of the countries in the region to defy American and Israeli plans regarding the expulsion of Palestinians, for example, and with regards to an attack against Iran, a war against Iran. And as I said, I think that there's a faction of the OCGFC who are backing all of this. And that's placing restraints even on the neocons in Washington. I mean, look at the whole discourse around the volleys between Iran and Israel that have gone on lately. When Israel retaliated against the Israeli attack on their embassy in Syria, no one referred to that as anything but retaliation. When they struck Israel again in retaliation for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, again it was described as retaliation. Now, if you've been following the region for any length of time, you'll know that the standard rule in reporting is that Israel is the only one who ever retaliates, and that anyone who ever retaliates against Israel is always portrayed as having attacked Israel for no reason. This in and of itself reflects a sea change, not to mention the fact that everyone understood, and Israel was made to understand, that Iran would and had a right to retaliate. You know, the U.S. said that they would not participate in any Israeli response to that retaliation. All of this is very new. 20 years ago, Iran would have been decimated for launching missile strikes against Israel. And the Gulf states would have supported that. 20 years ago, if an October 7th style attack had taken place, why, the Gazans would have all been expelled into Sinai within a matter of weeks. But the fact of the matter is that there is a new balance of power in the region. There's a new force in the region. And it's the combined powers of BRICS, the BRICS-aligned faction of the OCGFC, and other private sector interests. They're all coalescing around this new vision for the region. Because of this new dynamic, certain things that would have been done haphazardly before or in the past are now being approached with a great deal more care and deliberation, which is, I think, why we haven't seen Israel retaliate against Iran yet, because now they have to calculate the repercussions much more than they ever had to do before. See, the Americans were banking on animosity between the Gulf countries and Iran. They thought that this could be the basis for normalization, but today the Gulf countries are standing in solidarity with Iran. And the Gulf countries being in solidarity with Iran, Iran being in BRICS, that means that there are powerful elements of the OCGFC who are also standing in the way. They never had to factor any of these kinds of things into their policy decisions before, into their strategies before. Now you've got neocons in Washington themselves who are cautioning Israel to act with restraint, which has to be just as astonishing for them as it is for the rest of us. Because the political and the economic landscape has changed drastically. And I think they're still trying to map the terrain to find out what they can and can't do. You know, what used to be their playground has become a minefield, and they have to watch where they step and how they step. I think that they have been able to act wantonly in Gaza and to some extent in Lebanon only because this does not in and of itself interfere with the long-term plans for the region, as I talked about earlier. In fact, it actually just expedites the economic conquest of Israel and of the region. And it serves to further usher the Americans out of the region. So again, seeing the leadership of the resistance groups being targeted, in my opinion, only confirms that Israel and Zionism are on the countdown to obsolescence. Because Israel cannot exist, as it has existed for 50 years, without armed resistance groups for providing a pretext for funding, for arming, for training, for expansion, and so on. Eliminating resistance groups means Israel is finished, and it will have to be absorbed into the region and subordinated by the Gulf and by other foreign investors, who will replace the neocons and the military-industrial complex as Israel's benefactors. I think that there are elements inside of Israel who do understand that this is what the future looks like, but Netanyahu and his crew are in denial. They are straight-up Zionist fantasists who think that destroying Hamas and destroying Hezbollah means that they will reign supreme over the region. And they think that everyone will cower before their might. But every move that they make only actually reveals and compounds their weakness. We're watching a dreidel spinning off of a cliff. Their own ideological delusions are being manipulated. Their predictable behavior is being manipulated. You know, it's like the story of how you kill a wolf by covering a razor blade in blood and freezing it so that the wolf will start licking it until it lacerates its own tongue and bleeds to death. I know a lot of people can't understand this. A lot of people are just as convinced of Israel's power and cunning as the Zionists are. They have awe for Israel between their eyes, and it distorts their perception, the same way it distorts the perception of the Zionists themselves. But Israel is and always has been a failure, and it is and always has been a fake country, a fake power, a fake success. They have always lied about their competence, lied about their capabilities, lied about their skills, lied about their courage, and lied about everything else. They've only existed because they had a function for the American power structure. But now, even the American power structure itself is rapidly losing its own functionality within the context of a national private sector power and the OCGFC. So the Zionists are literally ordering from a menu of a restaurant that went out of business. You know, they might be planning to annex northern Gaza, parts of Lebanon, what have you, and they might be even doing that just for the purpose of trying to improve their eventual negotiating position. But when the dust settles, they're going to have a head-on collision with much richer, much more powerful forces that will have similar advantage over them as they are used to having over the Palestinians with regards to dictating the terms of the negotiations. See, they're used to trying to create facts on the ground. In other words, they seize land, which then becomes a matter of fact, and the U.S. treats it as valid. Well, this isn't going to be the case when the next Palestinian state negotiations take place. Because this isn't going to be America and Israel on one side of the table and the Palestinians alone on the other side of the table. It's going to be Israel on one side and BRICS and the global consensus on the other side. And they're going to be wholly unimpressed with Israel's demands. Look, America's share of the global GDP has drastically declined. I don't know if you've been keeping up. The world is not the way you think it is. America's share of global GDP was 40% in 1960. In 1960, America's economy represented 40% of all global GDP. Almost half. Well, today, in 2024, it's 15%. The BRICS nations have a greater share in global GDP than the G7. You know, America spends more money on military funding than any other country, but a huge percentage of that is due to overcharging, fraud, wasteful spending, or just money that's unaccounted for. Their spending does not equate to military power. If you subtract from their military budget all of the money that is literally just fraudulent, then America spends less on its military than China does, not to mention China's standing army and auxiliary forces are roughly double that of America's. You know, despite the hype, America's global military presence is half today what it was 20 years ago. Even their soft power is nothing like what it used to be. De-dollarization is rapidly increasing. Foreign purchases of U.S. Treasury securities have dropped by around 20%, which means people are losing confidence around the world in the American economy. Even fewer and fewer foreign students are choosing to study in the United States. Their cultural influence has dropped below Japan. Even American brands are finding it harder and harder to penetrate global South markets. Their reputation and their prestige has absolutely tanked. By any metric that you can think of, the United States is declining as a world power. Their relative influence is in retreat, and they're becoming increasingly isolated. Okay, all of this has serious ramifications for Israel. And I think that they have either not fully comprehended that, or else they are in denial about it. But no matter how you look at it, Zionism has no future. And in fact, everything that they're doing to try to secure their future is actually only ensuring their demise.